Hello and welcome to Superconnectivity. I'm your host, Charlie, the Professor Esser, and with me, as always, is
Phil, Filmy, and Parrish.
Thanks for joining me, Phil. So let me start off. You saw Tuesday's episode of Agents of Shield, correct? Wake Up.
Yes, I did.
Okay, so maybe I am just completely nutso on this. But as I'm watching it, I do have this feeling that there was an intentional. To me. So this is, and I said it was kind of a call out or an Easter egg. It's really kind of a riff, on Doctor Strange in there, in that the LMD May knows what's going on, knows what she is, knows she's being manipulated, but can't say anything. And to me, that just speaks to the old origin of Doctor Strange, where he realizes that Baron Mordo has made a deal with Dormammu, but Mordo places a spell on him, so he can't speak of it.
Well, like I told you before, I see the similarities, but this is just programming. I think it's not. I don't think it's any mystical origin.
No, it's not of mystical origin. It's why it's a riff.
Yeah.
It's a riff on it. It's not it's something that, and here's my point on it. It's something that when you see it, you go, oh, I see what they're doing there now. And to that extent, what then I would do, if I had Marvel Unlimited, is I would go back to those old Doctor Strange issues where the story was first told, and see how Doctor Strange circumvented the spell.
I forgot to do that. I'll have to do that.
Yeah. I mean, because to me that's the thing. It's like, oh, May is now the May LMD, and May LMD. It's like, if there's a more tragic character in the MCU, I don't know who it is. Mm-hmm. But May LMD is the most tragic character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because she is this character who now knows she's fake, has some programmed sense of awareness, and a programming that's going to let her find a way to save the day. Even knowing that saving the day may mean that she must eventually sacrifice herself in a way that is so much more disturbing than the way a human might say. When a human dies, a human has this programmed idea that, hey, maybe my soul will live on. When a robot knows they may be wiped, or decommissioned, or simply turned off and put into a corner, I mean, that's got to be a horribly frightening thing. But because this robot is also May, she's going to do it, because she's going to operate on what she knows is right.
It would be interesting, but I don't think they'll go this route. What if May gets mortally wounded, and the only way to save her is to upload her brain into the LMD body?
I mean, it's possible, except her brain's already been uploaded into the LMD body.
Yeah, true. So, I mean, I'm just saying, would they kill the original May and have this leave a copy, or?
Well, I mean, you could have.
I'm just thinking you reload the brain, because that way you're saying, okay, this is the original May's brain. Everything she was up until the moment of her death is in this LMD now.
Yeah, but that's still not the original May.
Yeah,
I mean that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing Peter's trying to explain in the clone conspiracy to Gwen, which is he and all of his clones had the same memories up to a point.
Yeah. Well,
and then once they're divergent. They're their own beings.
Well, I mean, when you have 20 clones running around, yeah, you could say, yeah, this is a copy of this brain, this is a copy of this brain. But say, the original May dies and all that's left is the LMD. Well, basically, that's May's brain, because that's the only one you have left.
Well, yeah, but once you've digitized the brain, you can have 100 copies.
Yeah.
You know the thing. It's like once it's digitized, or even we're not quite sure exactly how many, what kind of tapes the Red Skull's brain was recorded on in the 1940s, but however it was written down, it's a copy,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea is that yes, it is a copy. It is very much a separate entity from who the original was. And if the original continues on and the copy continues on, they're going to have different experiences. They may come back to a true north of personality, but how they get there is going to be very different each time. And of course, if one of them has an experience that throws their compass off, it's going to alter who they are as a person as well. I mean, one of the most complex aspects of the entire idea of the cloned consciousness is this idea: does that thing become its own thing, or is it a continuation of the original? Now, I'm a big believer from everything that I've seen that they've presented in the comics that it's its own thing. When you make a clone of someone and you upload all the knowledge of that previous person into the clone, it's its own creature. It may have all this knowledge, but that doesn't make it that person, or it's not one soul continuing on. It is just the data downloaded into a different drive. And one way you can think about it is, there's 100 copies of Pac-Man out there. Obviously, a lot more than a copy of copies of Pac-Man. We can each have Pac-Man on our phone. Each game we play is going to be different, and nothing that happens in a game you play on Pac-Man is going to influence what happens in the game I play on Pac-Man. And that, I think, is the inherent problem of clones. Even when we look at the clone conspiracy, and which of course is now completely unraveling under the rule of those dang Parkers, that inferior Parker brain, is as Otto would say. It is this idea that you can recreate something, but it's not the same thing. Even if it is exactly like them, even if it makes the exact same choices that other person would carry on, it is not that same person. And I think that's kind of the point of the whole clone conspiracy, is as Michael, not Michael Ian Black, but anyway, death is not a bug; it is a feature. That life only has meaning in that it does end.
Yes.
And if life could just have no end, then, especially if you could only solve it via science, then it doesn't have the value. In fact, there was actually a graphic novel series back in the 90s called Plastic Forks, which basically suggested this idea that if you could just create humans, human life would become devalued. Human life would essentially become plastic forks. You'd use them once and throw them away. And if you wanted that clear implication that the new Jacko was exactly seeing life as plastic forks, you need to look only deeper than the Warren clones, than the dupes. Which I think I called out at the time, was that, whoever this person is, he doesn't like Warren.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Because he had turned Warren into plastic forks, made their lives completely expendable. And, that is a concept there. I don't know. What do you think about the entire philosophical question of the duplicated memory, though?
I don't know. Like we said, it's always a gray area with it's a copy, and depending, I don't know, when you go into an artificial body, it kind of life kind of loses its meaning. But like in Spider-Man, you're going from one organic body to another, and I don't know, it just raises the question of the soul and everything. But no, when you were saying this just a few minutes ago, what popped into my head. I remember Star Trek: The Next Generation. Mr. Data trying to, his greatest wish was to become human, even though he would lose his immortality.
Yeah. See, you know what's funny there? I thought you were actually going to go to the Rikers.
Oh yeah.
The duplicated Rikers who, and it's that's always a thing with me. Everyone says, "Oh, the transporters, they just kill you and put you somewhere else." And actually, no. What the transporters do is they quantumly tunnel each particle of your existence to another point.
Mm-hmm.
They work through, and they've actually touched on this a couple times when they showed that when Barclay was transporting, that he was able to observe things in that quantum fluctuated field. That was scaring the heck out of him. Spark apparently had this weird ability to remain conscious in the midst of his own transport, which again suggests that you actually maintain some personal integrity through the process of transportation. But of course, what occurred with Riker in that moment was that he became quantumly twinned, which is something that can occur, is that two objects can become twin objects, because when you come because within that quantum idea that you can't know the position or location or direction of something, something could in fact just spontaneously become two exact versions of itself.
Or they've even done the opposite on Star Trek Voyager. Tuvok and Neelix were caught in the transporter accident, and they were fused into one being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, transporters, they're crazy.
I know. They're all, every show they're like, oh yeah, they're safe. There hasn't been a transporter accident in 50 years. Yeah, except on the series we're watching.
Yeah, well, as soon as someone says that, it's like, oh, great. Since you happen to mention that, this is totally going to be the one. Like if you were Gwenpool and someone said that, and by the way, Gwenpool, still one of my favorite characters ever. Just someone who says, wait, you just said that aloud. I can't go in there because you said it. Because since you said it, now it's something that's been put into the story. And so that's called dramatic foreshadowing. And I'm not foolish enough to cross that line. Oh, yeah. So, let's see here. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. The idea of what makes a mind or soul or personage. I've often jumped back to, the very interesting concept of the wizard and his clones. Mm-hmm. Which you never had until Hickman. Hickman was the first guy to really put forth the idea of wizard having clones. But once he presents it as this idea that the wizard is this guy making duplicates of himself, it immediately creates this question. Because there have been a lot of stories where the wizard dies.
Yes.
Like, did all these wizards die? And then he just has a system set up to replicate himself. Now, of course, this again makes the point that Miles Warren is just really bad at his job, because everyone else seems to be just fine making clones. Miles Warren is the only guy who just seems to can't wrap his head about it.
Oh, you know who popped into my head? Who made a copy of his mind that kind of backfired on him? Doom, when he put his mind into Christoph.
Oh yeah. Well, of course, but. That was, but that of course is what I call the Charles Xavier paradox. Mm-hmm. Charles Xavier made this point to Tony Stark during one of the Illuminati issues where he made the point that, I can make your mind believe anything I want it to, but your mind isn't silicon. Your mind isn't a blank computer chip. Mm-hmm. It knows who it's supposed to be, and it's going to mess with it. In fact, to that extent, it's kind of suggests that, the notion of transference of essence or intelligence is a false idea. When you look at and I've presented this idea before, which is that when Otto rewrote Peter's brain, he didn't actually put his soul in Peter's body. He just rewrote Peter's brain to think it was Doc Ock. And he rewrote his own brain to make it think that it was Peter Parker. But if Doc Ock had just rewritten Peter's brain with his own memories, and not with his own brain in the same process, he would have seen that there were two Doc Ocks running around. And one of them had Peter Parker's brain, which wanted to be Peter Parker. Now, of course, what I've always said about Peter Parker is not as noble as he says he is. In fact, what I will say about Peter Parker is the only reason Peter Parker is noble is because he is constantly reminding himself how to be noble. He is constantly telling himself, Peter Parker is kind of, in some ways, maybe the Ned Flanders of superheroes. If you ever read or watch any intense analysis of the character of Ned Flanders, his hyper religiosity is what keeps him calm, because he refuses to engage in the 7 deadly sins, of which wrath is one. Wrath and anger, And Peter Parker is a hero not because his first instinct was to be a hero, but because he lives in constant guilt over Uncle Ben. And it's such a point of trauma. You kind of wonder if maybe Peter needs to go get his head shrunk. Him and Jen Walters need to go dig up Doc Samson again and actually really have a conversation on this stuff, because really their personalities are dramatically changed by this trauma. And when your personality dramatically changes like that, it's probably not a good thing emotionally for you, But as I've said before, in my mind, when Peter rewrote his brain onto, when Doc Ock rewrote his brain onto rewrote his mind onto Peter's brain, it had to deal with the fact that Peter, even though he presented himself as this very noble person, at his core was venial. And this idea that the superior Spider-Man was very venial, very criminal in his nature, it's easy to blame that on Dr. Octopus. But I think that was a lot more of who Peter truly is than he was willing to admit. An interesting point about Dr. Octopus is, as has been made before, this idea that, when you're a supervillain, often you were a perfectly nice guy until the incident. And that was for a long time the official word on Dr. Octopus. That, like so many other villains, he was just driven insane by the freak accident that trapped him in his tentacles. Which might suggest that, honestly, that an actual Doc Ock body, a reformed Doc Ock body, removed of its imperfections, might be that normal, sane Doc Ock again. And it's an interesting question with Dr. Octopus. Could he be a hero if he was actually a nice guy?
I don't know. They've already kind of done that, because back during the original Clone Saga, Kane killed Dr. Octopus, but then later these ninjas resurrected his body, and they plugged there was like a computer program copy of his brain they plugged in, and he just came back angrier.
Yeah. I mean, anything's possible. Yeah, I mean, honestly, they've kind of forsaken that since the Superior Spider-Man saga, because in the Superior Spider-Man saga, you really get this idea that Doc had always been a jerk. He just was mouseier before he had super strong tentacle arms. Um, that basically, back when he was just a nerdy kid, he wasn't easily, he wasn't a jerk, but everyone thought he was a real nice guy because he was, had basic socialization and politeness understood.
Mm-hmm.
But once you gave him power, his true, much like Peter Parker, his true evil self emerged, this narcissistic, self-aggrandizing person that, without power, he was actually, people would actually confuse him for a nice guy. With power, he was just a horrifying monster. And, and Peter Parker, very similar. Took the death of Uncle Ben to make him want to be a good guy. One imagines that perhaps the death of Ms. Marconi may drive Otto to reevaluate his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Ock is a hero. That would be interesting.
That's the book Charlie Esser wants.
Well, I would love if he was. You have to have some humility to be a hero, and that I think is, for what it's worth, that it was always the strength of Reed Richards.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he was always the smartest guy, he had intense humility about that. He did have self-doubt because the few times because the one time he actually really bucked with his better judgments, he really messed up everything. He screwed up his friends. He screwed up the life of his fiance, his brother-in-law, and his best friend because he just had to prove he was right. And I think they have dealt with it many times, that idea that self-doubt feeds into him. And that brings me, I think, to what I think is one of the biggest questions I have about the current Marvel Universe post Secret Wars, which is, where did all these people come from? And we had made the point, I think last episode, or possibly it was in a Roundup episode, that that they never got a resolution to the Superior Iron Man storyline,
mm-hmm.
because the Superior Iron Man story ended with Cap in his Cap armor versus Tony in his symbiote armor, duking it out as the planet was destroyed in the incursion. And it's an interesting point in that when we come back to our post-incursion world, Tony's no longer the superior Iron Man. He's just regular Iron Man. And it makes me wonder if this Tony we have is necessarily the Tony from the 616. That as Franklin is recreating these worlds, and he put some ultimate characters in there, how do we know that this Tony Stark isn't Ultimate Tony Stark?
Mm.
He might have had some of his memories realigned to be this world's Tony Stark. But the fact of the matter is, when the Ultimate Universe ended, that was where a Tony Stark was. And so if Franklin is picking these people from the available universes, or Marvel universes, or portions of universes that are reforming, maybe he is looking for an Iron Man and is grabbing one from another universe. Especially if he's not building a place for the Fantastic Four to be. Which is interesting in and of itself, that Johnny and Ben got sent back to Earth, whereas Reed, Sue, and the rest of the kids all stayed up on some place in outside of reality.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what that means, but it's interesting. What else is going on right now, Phil?
I did see. I guess there was a quick article today that what's his name? Oh, Dave Bautista was saying they might have to do some CGI on Avengers Infinity War just so they can get everyone on screen because everyone's schedules are so hectic.
Wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, this Infinity War thing, that is going to be huge.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if that's going to make it better, but it will certainly have some spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm looking forward to Ragnarok. I'm looking forward to whatever comes between Ragnarok and Guardians of the Galaxy 2. You know, it's interesting. I guess that counts. Okay, I was actually going to just make a whole thing about how we don't have any real street level heroes in the next series, but yes, Spider-Man technically is. So there we go. I know as soon as we hang up, I'll think of something I forgot to mention. Is there anything that you can think of? Anything else? This was one thing I wanted to mention. Do you ever watch Avengers Age of Ultron, which is the Avengers cartoon?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Did you see the most recent episode, at least the most recent episode I saw, which was essentially Helmet, Zemo, bringing back Heinrich Zemo, but then getting betrayed by him. And it was interesting to me just because they really created this friendship or even association between Helmet and Steve.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it does. But of course, Helmet is such an interesting character because he does have, in many ways, Helmet is the Hydra Cap, who everyone knew as Hydra. Helmet was not particularly interested in any racial superiority or anything like that. He just wanted his rightful position as a ruler of the Empire. And I think that, how they approach Helmet is always very interesting. Heinrich, I think, was just sort of, a guy in a purple mask. He didn't do much. He didn't say much. They didn't ask many questions. But Helmet definitely does ask the deep questions and wants to see if there's an answer. And I do wonder how that friendship with Steve Rogers is going to play out. It's a very interesting world, this world with the Cosmic Cube, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it yet. But I am certainly enjoying the ride. Oh, anything else you want to talk about tonight, Phil?
No, I think that's about it. But hear all our thoughts on the whole Steve Rogers current storyline in all new Marvel Roundup this week.
Sounds good. And Phil, if they want to reach out to you personally, how can they find you?
You can always contact me, nightwingpdp@gmail.com. On Twitter, I am at nightwingpdp. And just check me out on a bunch of shows here on Enough Said. I'm also on Before the Bat and Legends of DC with Charlie Esther and others.
Very awesome. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for connecting with us this week. If you'd like to reach out to me, of course, you can always do so at my email address at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, at gmail.com. If you don't know how to spell superconnectivity, look at the podcast device you're currently looking at. It should be written somewhere on there. And of course, if you'd like to follow me on the Twitters as I live tweet Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Legends of Tomorrow, and of course, The Incredible Hulk, 7 o'clock on Saturdays on MeTV, feel free to reach out to me at Charlie Esser. That's CHARLIE ESSER. Look for the 2 E's in the middle for quality. I totally almost forgot what information I was giving you. I almost gave you all my personal phone number. So
almost forgot his name.
Oh, yeah. Well, I always forget my name. Somebody. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for connecting with us this week. It is always a pleasure. Please connect with us again. Good night.